there's a quiet moment that arrives in the life of every person who has ever dared to chase something meaningful. It usually comes late at night, when the world is asleep and the noise has finally faded. You sit alone in the dim glow of a single lamp, or perhaps just the cold light of your phone screen, and you realize something that cuts deeper than any failure ever could. You realize that no one is coming to save you. No one is going to hand you the keys to your dreams. No mentor is going to appear out of nowhere with all the answers. No crowd is going to cheer you on when you take your first uncertain steps. The people you thought would stand beside you have turned away, not out of cruelty, but out of their own fears, their own doubts, their own limitations, and in that moment, you are faced with a choice that will define everything that comes after. Do you crumble under the weight of that loneliness, or do you become something else entirely? This is not a story about self-help platitudes or empty motivation. This is not about believing in yourself or manifesting your destiny, or any of the comfortable lies we tell ourselves when the world feels too hard. This is about something far more ancient, far more real, and far more dangerous. This is about the cold, unflinching wisdom of a man who lived 500 years ago, a man who understood power, survival, and human nature in ways that still make people uncomfortable today. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli, and he wrote a book that would change the world forever. Not because it told people what they wanted to hear, but because it told them what they needed to know. And what he knew, more than anything else, was this: if you want to succeed in a world that owes you nothing, you must learn to walk alone. You must learn to be your own fortress, your own army, your own unwavering belief. Because the moment you depend on the support of others is the moment you give them the power to destroy you. Now, before we go any further, let me make something clear. When most people hear the name Machiavelli, they think of manipulation. They think of ruthlessness. They think of the dark arts of power, the kind of scheming and backstabbing you see in political thrillers or corporate dramas. And yes, Machiavelli wrote about those things, but if that's all you think he was about, then you've missed the point entirely. Because what Machiavelli really understood, what he spent his entire life trying to communicate, was the brutal truth about human nature. He understood that the world does not reward the naive. He understood that good intentions alone will not save you. He understood that if you do not take control of your own destiny, someone else will take control of it for you. And most importantly, he understood that the people who rise to the top, the ones who build empires and reshape reality itself, are not the ones who wait for permission. They are the ones who act when everyone else is paralyzed by doubt. They are the ones who move forward when there is no clear path. They are the ones who succeed with zero support, because they never needed it in the first place. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the world that shaped Machiavelli's thinking. 15th century Italy was not a country. It was a battlefield. A chaotic, violent, constantly shifting landscape of warring city-states, each one clawing for dominance, each one ruled by men who understood that power was not a birthright, but a prize to be seized. Florence, Venice, Milan, Rome, Naples. These were not just cities. They were empires in miniature, and their leaders were some of the most cunning, ambitious, and ruthless individuals the world has ever seen. This was the Renaissance, yes, the age of Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael, the age of beauty and genius and human achievement. But it was also an age of treachery, an age where alliances shifted like the wind, where today's friend was tomorrow's executioner, where a single miscalculation could cost you everything: your wealth, your position, your life. into this world, Niccolo Machiavelli was born. Not as a prince, not as a nobleman, not as someone destined for greatness. He was born into a modest family, a family of minor standing, with no real wealth and no real lower. He had no inheritance waiting for him, no network of influential friends, no safety net. If he was going to make something of himself, it would have to be through his own intelligence, his own cunning, his own relentless will. And so he studied. He watched. He learned how the game was played. He saw how men rose and fell, how republics were built and destroyed, how the machinery of power actually worked beneath all the pageantry and ritual. And slowly, carefully, he made himself indispensable. By the time he was in his late 20s, he had clawed his way into a position of real influence. He became the second chancellor of the Republic of Florence, a role that put him at the center of political and military strategy. He traveled on diplomatic missions. He negotiated with kings and generals. He saw firsthand how decisions were made, how wars were won and lost, how the fates of thousands could hinge on a single conversation in a darkened room. But here's the thing about power. It is never stable. It is never guaranteed. And the moment you start to believe that you are safe is the moment you are most vulnerable. In 1512, everything collapsed. The Medici family, who had been exiled from Florence, returned with the backing of foreign armies and seized control of the city. The republic that Machiavelli had served was dismantled overnight. And Machiavelli, who had been one of its most prominent figures, suddenly found himself on the wrong side of history. He was arrested. He was tortured. He was imprisoned. And then, when they finally released him, he was cast out into the countryside, stripped of his position, his salary, his purpose. He had nothing. No support, no allies, no prospects. He was alone, exiled, forgotten. Most men in his position would have given up. Most men would have quietly faded into obscurity, nursing their bitterness and waiting for death. But Machiavelli was not most men. He did something that would echo through the centuries. He began to write. Not for approval, not for an audience, not even for publication, at least not at first. He wrote because it was the only thing left to him, the only way to make sense of everything he had seen and everything he had lost. And what he wrote was not a memoir or a lament. It was a manual, a guide, a cold, clear-eyed examination of how power actually works in the real world. He called it The Prince, and it would become one of the most infamous, most controversial, most misunderstood books ever written. In it, he laid out the principles that he had learned through years of observation and experience. Principles that had nothing to do with morality or fairness or justice. Principles that were based entirely on what worked, what actually produced results, what allowed some men to rise while others fell. And at the heart of it all was a single, unshakable truth. You cannot rely on others. You cannot wait for the world to give you what you deserve. You cannot build your success on the goodwill of people who may turn against you at any moment. If you want to win, if you want to survive, if you want to carve out a space for yourself in a world that will crush you without a second thought, you must be self-sufficient. You must be willing to stand alone. You must be your own source of strength, your own source of vision, your own source of relentless forward momentum. Because the moment you depend on the support of others is the moment you become weak. And in a world like this, weakness is death. Now I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds harsh. This sounds cynical. This sounds like the philosophy of someone who has lost faith in humanity. And maybe in some ways it is. But let me ask you something. Look at your own life. Look at the moments when you needed help the most. Look at the times when you reached out, when you expected someone to be there, when you believed that the people around you would support you, would lift you up, would fight for you the way you would fight for them. How many times did that actually happen? How many times were you met with silence, with indifference, with excuses? How many times did you realize, too late, that the only person who truly cared about your success was you? This is not about being bitter. This is about being awake. This is about seeing the world as it actually is, not as we wish it to be. And the reality is that most people are too consumed with their own struggles, their own fears, their own survival to genuinely invest in yours. It's not malice. It's just human nature. And once you accept that, once you truly internalize it, something remarkable happens. You stop waiting. You stop looking for permission. You stop trying to convince people to believe in you, because you realize that the only belief that matters is your own. Machiavelli understood this in a way that few people ever have. He understood that the greatest leaders, the ones who actually change the course of history, are not the ones who inspire love or loyalty or devotion. They are the ones who inspire themselves. They are the ones who wake up every morning with a clarity of purpose that does not depend on external validation. They are the ones who move forward regardless of whether anyone is watching, whether anyone is cheering, whether anyone even notices. They do not need a crowd. They do not need a team. They do not need a support system. They need only a goal, a strategy, and the ruthless determination to see it through. And this is where most people fail. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack potential. They fail because they are waiting for the right moment, waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for someone to give them permission to start, waiting for the stars to align and the path to become clear, and the universe to send them a sign that they are on the right track. But here's the truth that no one wants to tell you: the moment never comes. The opportunity never arrives. The permission is never granted. Because the world does not work that way. The world does not care about your dreams. The world does not care about your potential. The world only cares about results, and results come from action, from movement, from the willingness to take the first step, even when you have no idea where it will lead. Machiavelli wrote about this in The Prince, with a precision that still cuts like a blade. He spoke about virtue, a concept that is often mistranslated as virtue, but really means something closer to strength, ability, strategic excellence. It is the quality that allows a person to shape their own destiny, to impose their will on a chaotic and indifferent universe. And he contrasted it with fortuna, which is luck, chance, the unpredictable forces that govern so much of life. Machiavelli believed that most people are entirely at the mercy of fortune. They are like leaves blown by the wind, carried wherever fate decides to take them. But a person with virtue, a person with that inner strength and clarity and strategic brilliance, can seize control of their own life. They can bend fortune to their will. They can create their own luck, not through magic or mysticism or wishful thinking, but through preparation, through action, through an unrelenting focus on what they can control. And that is the secret. That is the thing that separates those who succeed from those who do not. It is not talent. It is not connections. It is not even luck, though luck certainly plays a role. It is the ability to focus entirely on what you can control and to let go of everything else. Most people spend their entire lives paralyzed by things they cannot change. They obsess over what others think of them. They worry about whether they have enough support, enough resources, enough advantages. They compare themselves to people who started with more, who had better opportunities, who were born into circumstances that gave them a head start. And all of that worry, all of that comparison, all of that mental energy spent on things outside their control drains them of the one thing they actually need: the will to act. Machiavelli would have looked at this and laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of recognition, because he had seen it 1,000 times. He had watched men with every advantage in the world collapse because they were weak, indecisive, paralyzed by fear. And he had watched men with nothing, no money, no connections, no support, rise to unimaginable heights because they refused to wait for the world to give them permission. They simply took what they needed. They built what they wanted. They moved forward with a clarity and a ruthlessness that made the impossible inevitable. And this is where we need to talk about something uncomfortable. Something that most motivational speakers and self-help gurus will never tell you, because it doesn't fit neatly into their narrative of positivity and empowerment. The truth is that succeeding with zero support requires you to become a different kind of person. Not a worse person necessarily, but a harder one, a more calculating one. A person who understands that sentiment and strategy are not the same thing. A person who can look at their own life with the cold, analytical eye of a general surveying a battlefield and make decisions based not on what feels good, but on what works. Machiavelli was brutally honest about this. He wrote that it is better for a leader to be feared than loved, if they cannot be both. Now, most people hear that and think it's about cruelty, about ruling through terror and intimidation. But that's not what he meant at all. What he meant was this: love is unreliable. Love is conditional. Love can turn to hate in an instant when circumstances change, when people's interests shift, when the winds of fortune blow in a different direction. But respect, earned through competence and strength and the consistent demonstration of capability that endures, that is something you can build on. That is something that does not evaporate the moment things get difficult. Think about it in your own life. The people you truly respect, the ones whose opinions actually matter to you, are they the ones who constantly seek your approval? Are they the ones who bend themselves into pretzels trying to make everyone happy? Or are they the ones who have clear boundaries, who know what they stand for, who move through the world with a quiet confidence that comes from self-sufficiency? The truth is that people don't respect weakness. They don't respect neediness. They don't respect someone who is constantly looking for validation, constantly seeking support, constantly trying to prove that they deserve to take up space in the world. What they respect is competence. They respect results. They respect someone who can stand alone and still succeed. And here's the paradox that Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. The moment you stop needing support is often the moment you start receiving it. Not because people suddenly become more generous or more caring, but because they are drawn to strength. They are drawn to certainty. They are drawn to people who are moving forward with such clarity and purpose that they create a gravitational field around themselves. When you are desperate for help, when you are reaching out with shaking hands and pleading eyes, people pull away. It's uncomfortable. It's draining. It makes them feel responsible for your success or failure, and most people don't want that burden. But when you are self-sufficient, when you are building something real and tangible and undeniable, when you are so focused on your goal that you barely notice who is watching. Suddenly, people want to be part of it. Suddenly, they want to contribute. Suddenly, they see you as someone worth investing in. Not because they feel sorry for you, but because they recognize that you are going somewhere with or without them. This is one of the most powerful lessons in The Prince, buried beneath layers of political strategy and military tactics. Machiavelli observed that successful leaders do not beg for loyalty. They do not plead for support. They create conditions where support becomes inevitable. They build momentum. They demonstrate competence. They achieve small victories that lead to larger ones. And as they do, people naturally align themselves with that success, not out of altruism, but out of self-interest. Because everyone wants to be associated with a winner. Everyone wants to claim they were there from the beginning. But very few are willing to bet on you when the outcome is uncertain. Very few are willing to stand beside you when you are struggling, when you are still figuring things out, when there is no clear evidence that you will succeed. So what do you do with that knowledge? You stop waiting for them. You stop building your strategy around the assumption that help will come. You design your life, your goals, your plans, as if you are the only resource you have. Because in the moments that matter most, you probably are. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start making real progress. Because when you remove the variable of external support from the equation, when you stop factoring it into your calculations, you become focused. You become efficient. You become dangerous. Not in a violent sense, but in the sense that you are now a force that cannot be easily dismissed or ignored or stopped. You are no longer at the mercy of other people's schedules, other people's priorities, other people's whims. You are a self-contained system, generating your own energy, creating your own opportunities, building your own momentum. Machiavelli saw this play out over and over again in the lives of the leaders he studied. The ones who succeeded were not the ones who had the most support at the beginning. They were the ones who were willing to act alone, to make difficult decisions without consensus, to move forward even when everyone around them was counseling caution or retreat. He wrote about Cesare Borgia, one of the most controversial figures of the Renaissance, a man who was simultaneously admired and despised, feared and respected. Borgia was not born into a position of overwhelming power. He had advantages, certainly, but he also had enemies, rivals, obstacles that would have crushed a lesser man. What made him formidable was not his resources. It was his willingness to act decisively, ruthlessly, strategically, without waiting for permission or approval. He built alliances when they served him, and broke them just as quickly when they did not. He took risks that others considered insane. He made moves that seemed reckless until they succeeded. And through it all, he maintained an absolute clarity about what he wanted and what he was willing to do to get it. Now, I'm not suggesting you should model your life after Cesare Borgia. The man's story ended badly, and many of his methods were morally indefensible. But the principle underneath his success is what matters here. The principle is this: action beats perfection. Movement beats planning. A flawed strategy executed with conviction will almost always outperform a perfect strategy that never leaves the drawing board. Because the world rewards those who move, who test, who learn by doing rather than by endless preparation. And when you are operating without support, when you don't have a team of advisors, or a safety net, or a cushion of resources to fall back on, you cannot afford to wait until everything is perfect. You have to be willing to start before you're ready. You have to be willing to learn as you go. You have to be willing to fail, adjust, and try again, over and over and over, until something finally works. This is where most people get stuck. They have been conditioned, through education and culture and well-meaning advice, to believe that success comes from careful planning and thorough preparation, and making sure all the pieces are in place before you make your move. And yes, planning matters. Preparation matters. But there comes a point where planning becomes procrastination, where preparation becomes paralysis, where waiting for the perfect moment becomes an excuse to never start at all. Machiavelli understood that the perfect moment does not exist. There are only moments, each one imperfect, each one fraught with risk and uncertainty, and the ones who succeed are the ones who learn to act within that uncertainty rather than waiting for it to resolve. He wrote about this in a way that still resonates today. He said that fortune is like a raging river that floods everything in its path. When it is calm, men can build dams and channels to control it. But when it floods, it destroys everything, and there is nothing they can do. The wise leader, then, prepares during times of calm, so that when fortune turns against them, they have the structures in place to weather the storm. But here's the crucial part. You cannot prepare for everything. You cannot anticipate every twist of fate, every betrayal, every unexpected obstacle. What you can do is build the internal resilience, the mental toughness, the strategic flexibility to respond to whatever comes. And that is something you must do alone. No one can give you resilience. No one can hand you mental toughness. These are qualities forged through hardship, through struggle, through the experience of facing challenges without a safety net, and somehow finding a way through. This is why succeeding with zero support is not just about achieving external goals. It is about becoming a different kind of person. It is about developing a core of steel within yourself, a foundation that does not crack when the pressure increases, when the doubts multiply, when everyone around you is telling you to give up. Machiavelli called this virtù, and he believed it was the single most important quality a person could possess. Not kindness, not compassion, not even intelligence, though intelligence certainly helps. But the ability to take reality as it is, not as you wish it to be, and to act within that reality with precision and purpose. And here's what that looks like in practical terms. It means you stop making excuses. You stop blaming your circumstances. You stop pointing to all the reasons why things are harder for you than they are for someone else. Because even if those reasons are valid, even if you genuinely did start with fewer advantages, even if the world has been unfair to you, none of that changes what you have to do next. None of that changes the fact that your success is still your responsibility. No one is going to swoop in and level the playing field for you. No one is going to hand you the opportunities you deserve. If you want them, you have to create them. And that requires a level of self-reliance that most people never develop because it's uncomfortable. It's lonely. It's hard. But it's also liberating. Because once you truly accept that you are on your own, once you stop waiting for rescue or support or validation, you become free. Free from disappointment, free from resentment, free from the exhausting cycle of hoping and being let down over and over again. You stop wasting energy on things you cannot control and pour all of it into the one thing you can, your own actions, your own decisions, your own relentless forward motion. And in that focus, in that clarity, you find a kind of power that cannot be taken from you. because it does not depend on anyone else. It does not require permission or approval or consensus. It is entirely yours. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in Exile, remember? He wrote it when he had nothing, when his career was over, when his enemies had won, when there was no reason to believe that anything he wrote would ever matter. He wrote it anyway, not because he expected it to change his circumstances, but because it was the only thing left that he could control. And in doing so, he created something that would outlive him by centuries. Something that would influence kings and generals and revolutionaries and entrepreneurs. Something that would continue to speak to people 500 years later, because the truths he uncovered are timeless. The world he lived in was different from ours in 1,000 ways, but human nature remains the same. And the fundamental challenge, how to succeed in a world that owes you nothing and will give you only what you take, that challenge has not changed at all. So let's talk about what this actually means for you. Because this isn't just historical philosophy. This isn't just an academic discussion about Renaissance politics. This is about your life, right now, today. Maybe you're trying to build a business and no one believes in your idea. Maybe you're trying to master a craft and everyone around you thinks you're wasting your time. Maybe you're trying to change your life in some fundamental way, and the people closest to you are actively discouraging you, not because they want you to fail, but because your success would force them to confront their own lack of action. Whatever your situation, the question is the same. What do you do when you have zero support? The Machiavellian answer is simple, though far from easy. You proceed as if support does not matter. You identify your goal with absolute clarity. You break it down into concrete, achievable steps. You take the first step, even if it's imperfect, even if you're terrified, even if you have no idea whether it will work. And then you take the next step, and the next. You build momentum through action, not through planning or hoping or waiting. You measure your progress not by how many people believe in you, but by what you have actually accomplished. And when you fail, because you will fail, you analyze what went wrong with the same cold objectivity that Machiavelli brought to his study of power. You don't make excuses. You don't blame external factors. You ask yourself, what could I have done differently? What did I learn? How do I adjust and try again? This is the path of the self-made, and it is brutal. It requires you to be both your harshest critic and your most unwavering supporter. It requires you to push yourself when no one else is watching, when there is no external accountability, when the only thing driving you forward is your own commitment to the goal. It requires you to develop an almost superhuman level of discipline, because discipline is what carries you forward when motivation fails, when excitement fades, when the initial rush of beginning something new gives way to the grinding, unglamorous work of actually building something real. Machiavelli would tell you that this is not a weakness. This is strength. This is what separates those who shape the world from those who are shaped by it. Because anyone can succeed when they have unlimited resources, a supportive network, perfect conditions. The real test is what you can do with nothing. The real test is whether you have the virtù to impose your will on an indifferent universe, to carve out space for yourself where none existed, to build something from nothing through sheer force of determination and strategic intelligence. And here's the part that no one tells you, the part that Machiavelli understood in his bones. Once you learn to succeed without support, you become unstoppable. Because you have developed a kind of self-sufficiency that cannot be undermined. You are no longer vulnerable to the opinions of others, to the withdrawal of resources, to the shifting of alliances. You have proven to yourself that you can stand alone and still win. And that knowledge, that bone-deep certainty, changes everything. It changes how you carry yourself. It changes how others perceive you. It changes the kinds of opportunities that come your way. Because people can sense it. They can sense when someone has that core of unshakable strength, and they respond to it. Not always positively, sometimes with resentment or fear, but they respond. They cannot ignore you. They cannot dismiss you. You have made yourself into a force that demands recognition. This is the lesson that echoes across 5 centuries, from Machiavelli's exile in the Tuscan countryside to your life right now. You don't need permission to begin. You don't need a team of supporters cheering you on. You don't need perfect conditions or unlimited resources or a clear guarantee of success. What you need is something far simpler and far more difficult: the courage to start anyway. The wisdom to learn as you go. The resilience to survive your own failures. And the absolute, unshakable commitment to keep moving forward regardless of who is watching, who is helping, or who believes in you. Machiavelli spent his final years in that quiet exile, far from the centers of power he had once navigated with such skill. He never regained his position. He never saw the restoration of the republic he had served. By conventional measures, his life ended in failure. But he left behind something that no political position could have given him. He left behind a truth that would outlive empires. The truth that power, real power, does not come from what others give you. It comes from what you build within yourself. It comes from your ability to act when action seems impossible. It comes from your willingness to stand alone when everyone else has walked away. And so here you are, perhaps in your own moment of exile, your own moment of isolation, your own dark night of realizing that the support you expected will not arrive. You can see this as a tragedy, as evidence that you were never meant to succeed. Or you can see it as Machiavelli would have seen it, as a liberation, as the stripping away of every comfortable illusion that was holding you back. As the moment when you finally become dangerous, not to others, but to the limitations that have defined your life until now. The world will not reward you for waiting. It will not applaud your patience or your deference or your careful preparation. It rewards those who move, those who build, those who take what they need and create what doesn't exist. And it reserves its highest honors not for those who succeeded with every advantage, but for those who succeeded with none. For those who looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept the impossibility. For those who understood that zero support is not a disadvantage, it's a test. A test that most people fail not because they lack ability, but because they lack the ruthless self-belief required to proceed alone. Machiavelli passed that test. He wrote his masterpiece in the ruins of his career, and in doing so, he proved the very principle he was teaching, that your greatest work often emerges not from comfort and support, but from necessity and isolation. That the person you become when everything is stripped away is the person you were meant to be all along. So take his lesson, carry it forward. Stop waiting for the world to give you what you deserve. Stop hoping that circumstances will align in your favor. Stop looking for the support that will make everything easier. Instead, look inward. Build your fortress there. Forge your will into something unbreakable. And then, move forward with the cold clarity of someone who knows that success is not a gift, it's a conquest. Not something you receive, but something you take. Because 500 years from now, When someone looks back at this moment in your life, they won't remember who supported you. They won't care who believed in you or who stood beside you. They will only see what you built, what you created, what you achieved when you had every reason to quit and no reason to continue, except the one that mattered most. You decided that your vision was worth fighting for, even if you had to fight alone. That is how you succeed with zero support. Not by waiting for the world to change, but by becoming the kind of person who changes it anyway. The rest is up to you.